Hello everybody, Ben Rogers here, the Raptors Digest. Riker, the dust has settled. We finally had that DeMar DeRozan game. All the anticipation, all that has come up. But the Toronto Raptors have a very important stretch of games coming forward. They're closing the season. The playoff Eastern Conference race has been super tight. We're competing with Milwaukee, all that sort of stuff. And one big question that still remains to be answered is our big deadline acquisition, Marc Gasol. He's a consistent all-star center. He's a 3-time all-star, I believe. He's coming in expecting to probably be a starter, but he seems like a team player. But Serge Ibaka obviously has manned the starting position at center all season and has really stepped up his game this year. So there's kind of a debate amongst Raptors fans about who should be the starting center for this team going forward. We've talked about it a little bit. What's your take on who should be the starting center for the Raptors?
Right. Well, my initial reaction to this comment is, of course, expectations. Mm-hmm. If Marc Gasol is coming in with the expectation that he's going to start, and what does that mean? And how will it affect his performance? Because I would say that he was probably coming in under the assumption that he will be introduced into the starting lineup, being the more veteran player, being perhaps the more proven player, at least in terms of career accomplishments. We could get into that. But is having him come off the bench, will his expectations perform or affect his performance, right? Is it the worst thing to keep him off the bench? And you're saying the second thing is that Serge Ibaka was starting for the entire season. It's not necessarily true. When Jonas was healthy, we had a rotation depending upon the matchup on the given night as to which player was going to start. So perhaps my initial take would be maybe that's the best way moving forward, because undeniably, if you watch in the last game, Marc Gasol, he's slower getting up the court, right? But he has more potential in terms of playmaking, especially. I think he had the team high in assists in the last game. So they both bring something a little bit different. I would say all around, Marc Gasol is better, and I'd rather see him close games, depending upon the matchup, of course. But sometimes, if there's a really small ball, if they're playing a team like Milwaukee and perhaps Giannis is the 5, right? He'd be like the 5 but still a point guard handler. Maybe it'd be better to have a guy like Ibaka out there.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure, obviously, these two guys, it's hard to go wrong with picking either one of these players to be a consistent starter, because you mentioned it. They're both good players. They bring skills in different areas. Same with the Jonas-Serge dynamic. You brought that up. But Serge Ibaka started probably like 70 to 80% of the games. There were games that Jonas started, depending on matchup base. And Marc Gasol obviously has a different skill set than Jonas, but is a guy that's a more bigger, lumbering player. He's not going to be, as you mentioned, Serge Ibaka is a bit quicker, more fleet of foot, at the center position. So maybe he'll make more sense when other teams run small ball lineups, like the Bucks one where they run Giannis at center, or the Celtics, Al Horford, I guess, can be considered more of a stretch 5, so to speak. So there's a lot of potential for matchup adjustments there. But if you were to, obviously, you mentioned Marc Gasol, you think is the more talented player. And I tend to agree with that. Initially, when the trade happened, I said that Marc Gasol should be the starter because of the playmaking, because he elevates the players around him significantly. We saw him do it with the bench guys, but if he can do that with Kawhi Leonard, Lowry, all these players, I think it'll maximize his potential on this roster. And we want to establish a rotation where people are comfortable playing with each other. Obviously, it can be matchup based and it should be free flowing and everyone should be able to play with everyone. But, I think having Marc Gasol get some more run with the starters, get some more time. And you mentioned that's who should be closing lineups against most teams because it's the most talented 5 players on the court. I think Marc Gasol with the rest of the starters is our best lineup, so I think that's probably the lineup we should be close.
But now that I'm thinking of it, the gears are turning in my mind. We're going to have this argument, this debate here, and what I'm thinking is if we just even break down the most recent game, the game against the Spurs, right? You can make the argument that it was a good game. It was certainly an exciting game, but I think in terms of if you're looking towards what the Raptors want to play as moving forward into the playoffs, it certainly wasn't the best performance or the best outing to really make you feel confident or secure that they can make that push that the Raptors are hoping for, because of how they struggled to maintain or to withhold. Every time they would grab the lead, San Antonio would kind of come back into the mix, and there was stretches where they weren't able to score necessarily. And we seen a couple of breakout players, one being OG, confidently hit some shots that game, right? We had Jeremy Lin, who had flashes, didn't shoot amazing, like tremendous from the field, but he had flashes where...
In the fourth quarter, he was great. The fourth
quarter, really good. And the issue that we had last season was that the starters weren't really able to get the ball rolling. It was really the bench unit that always helped out the Raptors in giving that push. This season, the bench, and of course injuries have been so inconsistent, but you're more reliant. Kyle Lowry is starting to figure it out. Kawhi Leonard, even when he's having an off game, he's still going to get 25 points. He's still going to be a confident guy. You put him out there, and you know that he's going to get the ball in the basket somehow.
Superstar.
Exactly. So my concern would be having Serge Ibaka come off of the bench consistently now, moving forward to finish off the season, is now where is the offensive playmaking going to come from? And it's not just Jeremy Lin, because he struggled from the field, right? And he will get that, but imagine the lineup now, and I think the case is already closed for Marc Gasol closing games, right? To have him out there in the fourth quarter, because to have him, that playmaking ability with the best players, Kyle Lowry, Kawhi Leonard, that's a good lineup.
Yeah, but in general, because like sometimes Serge could be hot or whatever. And
exactly, but if they can already get their own, then why not put Jeremy Lin and Marc Gasol in the same lineup, where now you have two offensive playmakers that can complement OG, who is not really able to create his own shot yet, but has shown now on a big stage, right, in a very close game, that he's able to make these really big shots. Or Norman Powell, where he does moves, but it doesn't always work if he doesn't have a real.
He's not a playmaker.
Exactly. So what would you see this lineup being like now? Having Marc Gasol, he's a confident guy that's going to close out games, but to put him into the bench unit to kind of flow through the second quarter, so that you can really have confidence that both lineups, so to say, I'm a fan of the 8-man rotation, but regular season, so that both lineups are giving you that 1-2 punch.
Well, you mentioned the playmaking. It would be lacking. Obviously, the lineup with Marc Gasol in it is going to be the better playmaking lineup when you contrast that with a lineup with Serge. Marc Gasol is a much better playmaker, and that could be part of the reason we see a lot of, the bench has been salt since Marc Gasol addition has been made. But right? We have Jeremy Lin, who is a phenomenal playmaker. He's been getting assists left, right, and center in the 2 games that he's played for the Raptors, and he doesn't even know the offense. In the Danny Green podcast, he's joking around about how Kyle Lowry's telling him plays. He doesn't even know the offense yet. So Jeremy Lin, as he gets more integrated with the players, he's gonna, obviously his playmaking's only going to improve, and he's established himself as a very strong playmaker. And we had CJ Miles for a lot of stretch, and in theory, he's a good shooter, and he's doing a great job in Memphis. I'm really happy. I'm happy for CJ because he seems like such a great guy in his interviews and all that. But he struggled with the Raptors, and he doesn't create anything for other players. Now, Patrick McCaw, for what you can say about his offensive inconsistencies in terms of putting the ball in the hoop, he's been getting a lot of run with this Toronto Raptors team, and I think his ability to create plays, he doesn't necessarily is a scorer. He's kind of like a he's not going to necessarily get you 10, 15 points like you'd like for a top player off the bench.
Patrick McCaw looks to me like he's a slasher. And correct me if I'm wrong, because he's kind of being put in situations where he can be a spot-up guy, but he looks more comfortable as a slasher.
He looks more comfortable with the ball in his hands and being able to just create for other players. So we saw the game where he ran actually backup point guard for the Raptors. He looked very comfortable in that game, and that was honestly his best game of the season. So Patrick McCaw, I think if he gets some run in the bench unit, he's another guy that can create it off the bench. And Fred VanVleet, obviously he's not healthy right now. He's out for another few weeks. But, Fred VanVleet is going to be an integral part of the rotation, especially come playoff time. So I think we have 3 guys off the bench that could potentially be strong playmakers and get Serge Ibaka the ball. Because
I don't think so. I don't think so, because before we even talk about just what Serge Ibaka can do, is we've already allowed a full season of these guys to really prove themselves. Of course, the addition of Jeremy Lin, and he's going to be able to bring more offense, but his style of play really revolves around a very strong pick-and-roll game, and the ability to shoot that mid-range shot off of the pick and then to facilitate from that position. But Serge Ibaka on his own cannot create, right? He's not a guy that's ever going to be able to... He finishes shots, right? So now you're limiting the offense now to just small ball being able to create everything. And Fred VanVleet, for as good as he is, and for Patrick McCaw, for what he's going to maybe be able to do, and Norman Powell and all these guys... They've had opportunities throughout the season, and we have not seen consistency enough from the second unit that we can say it's enough just to have one extra playmaker out there to make this a really solid tandem now with the first unit and the second unit.
Well, yeah, so you bring up the point. Obviously, we've had the whole season to see things. Norman Powell has done a great job at being able to get his own buckets throughout the, off the bench, throughout the stretch of games since he came back from injury. I think we can both agree he's very, very much impressed us as Raptors fans. But you mentioned it, Serge Ibaka, he's not a guy that's going to create for other people. But He's a guy that will certainly get you buckets if you put him in the right positions. And I think the area where Serge Ibaka's most flourished this season, and it really showed through at the beginning of the year. He came out super hot, and we were a bit skeptical on why Serge Ibaka was starting over Jonas in the first 10, 15 games of the season, because obviously Jonas, as of last year, Jonas was a much more substantial, had a greater impact on the game than Serge Ibaka did, and obviously Serge was playing out of position and all that. But the areas that Serge Ibaka was put in was because he was playing the pick and roll with Kyle Lowry, and Kyle Lowry is obviously one of the best facilitators in the league and all that sort of stuff, but him off the bench where we can run these sort of sets for Serge Ibaka, not worrying about getting the ball to Kawhi and all that. When the bench unit's on the floor, we can run the offense through a pick and roll style, getting Jeremy Lin or Fred VanVleet off, running it with Serge Ibaka with a couple shooters around us, a couple slashers, Norman Powell, Patrick McCaw, OG Anunoby. I think that has a lot more potential. And it not only, right, because Serge Ibaka takes up a lot of shots. And by no means is that a bad thing. But when he's playing with Kawhi Leonard and these sorts of guys, you want to have the shots spread out. And I think Marc Gasol just kind of fits in with better players, a bit better than Serge Ibaka, because Serge Ibaka is not going to create anything for other guys. And I think we want to get that comfort, that familiarity with Marc Gasol, Kawhi Leonard, Kyle Lowry playing these stretch of games, Danny Green. That lineup just makes more sense. And I think to have the scoring punch, the firepower off the bench, having Serge Ibaka to really get buckets, Jeremy Lin, Fred VanVleet, and even Patrick McCaw, who can play make, to get him the ball, I think that bench unit will certainly thrive. And OG Anunoby, he's done a solid job. I think there's a lot of stuff. I made the video breaking down about OG Anunoby's possible breakout coming post All-Star break, and I think his play is not just indicative of Marc Gasol entering. I think he's becoming more confident. He's getting his handle back. His three-point shot has looked great. I like the potential of the bench, especially with Serge Ibaka there.
You know what? The argument from my perspective, because the Raptors haven't been blowing out teams, right? Yep. They've had a lot of close games. They've had a lot of games where they've really had to just step up and elevate in the fourth quarter. That seems to be the important point, and that's when we're having, Kawhi Leonard step up for the most part. And the same thing happened in the San Antonio game. He went 3 for 5 in the fourth after a really slow start. It looked like a very dismal game for him until that point. So he's able to do that. And what I see is there's 3 guaranteed shot creators that have proven themselves all season long, and that's Kyle Lowry. Say what you want about him, but he can create a shot and make one. Kawhi Leonard, obviously, and Pascal Siakam, who is absolutely able to destroy any matchup against him, right? And now you have 2 spot-up guys. You have 2 spot-up guys. You have Danny Green, and you have Serge Ibaka. Now, of course, you can slide Gasol into this lineup, who was, as I said in the last game, team high in assists. So he's almost a big man that is acting as a point guard, right? He's acting as, like we said, the offense can flow through him. He can be the main facilitator. But now what you have is you're limiting the bench lineup to being OG, Norman Powell, Patrick McCaw, all these guys, they except for OG, they want to be able to create, but they're not proven yet. And I'm not taking away from their game ability, but they're able to score, right? Yep. If the play and if the offense is run smoothly. And but then it makes sense to me because Jeremy Lin is a creator, right? And Fred VanVleet is, to a lesser extent, a creator as well. Again, VanVleet is a fantastic player, but he's not going to have him back now for a little while. Now you're reducing it to 4 spot-up shooters if you slide Serge Ibaka back into the lineup. Instead, you could have 2 guys who can run the offense through them in Jeremy Lin and Gasol and allow now more creative risks to be taken by the guys like Norman Powell and Patrick McCaw. And then you can still slide Marc Gasol up for the entirety of the fourth quarter if he stays out of foul trouble to have him into the the ability to. But this way that I see it is that now you're allowing more of an ability for the Raptors to sustain a lead, because the issue that they've had is they haven't been able to get out to this point. They've had to always play catch up, or at least like a really hard contested battle until the fourth quarter, which is when they're able to thrive.
Okay, so we both agree the Raptors' best lineup was with Gasol at the 5 and the regular starting unit.
Yep.
That's a game that would close lineups. And you mentioned the Toronto Raptors have struggled to really put teams away early. Those Wizards teams, all that. If we could just put them in the bag, get them out of the way, that's key. And I think Marc Gasol, being in the starting lineup, he's a playmaker, he does all these sorts of things, and I think he'll get the best out of the starters to really flow, get that offense looking crisp. And I think that's the most effective lineup to start with. I think the bench will still be very strong with Serge Ibaka there. He doesn't take away much, because he doesn't take away shots from OG Anunoby, Norman Powell. We don't mind if those guys get less shots, but we mind if Kawhi Leonard gets less shots, or Danny Green, Pascal Siakam, these sorts of players. So I think that's the issue there. And you mentioned the spot-up shooting, right? the 3-point spacing, it's been an issue all season. It's been a bit better as of late. The games where you knock down threes it's very nice, but we don't want the Toronto Raptors to revert back to where we were at the beginning of the season, where we couldn't throw the ball in the ocean. That was the most frightening thing watching this team at the beginning of the year. And Serge Ibaka, he shoots, he's a great mid-range shooter. He can get this shot in the mid-post, the low post spots. But as a 3-point shooter, his 3-point shot really hasn't been thriving this season. He's shooting about 26% on the year. And Marc Gasol for this season is shooting about, let me get the stat up here, 34%. So about 8% better. I think him having 5 guys that can consistently knock down threes in your starting unit just makes your whole roster horrifying. I think that will elevate all players.
I agree. Yeah. But this is another issue. This wouldn't be a problem. This wouldn't even be a debate. If we're putting out the best starting lineup for the regular season. Yep. Right. Of course, this lineup is not even a debate for the playoffs. Marc Gasol needs to be in the starting lineup. It's ridiculous unless matchup has. Okay, I'm just talking about for regular season to capitalize and get the most regular season wins as possible to try to get that first seed. It would be fine if I was confident that Nick Nurse wasn't going to play a 5-in 5-out rotation, but it's just we've seen it all season long. He wants to give as many players as much run as possible, right? So we're going to have inevitably the lineup where all of the bench players are out at one point. That's just how I see it going. Yep. Right? And now what you're doing with putting Serge Ibaka into this bench rotation is, what do you want to allow? You want to allow OG Anunoby. You want to allow Norman Powell to have these open shots, right, as a 3-point shooter. And because Marc Gasol would draw more attention in the lane, right, because he gets the ball in the high post, and now he's able to facilitate, he's able to attack, he draws in double teams, creating more space for the 3-point shooters. Right? But now you put Serge Ibaka into this lineup, and now people can sag off them and just, they can cover OG out on the perimeter. They can cover Patrick McCaw out on the perimeter. So now I'm seeing spacing, if that's the issue that you're bringing up. I'm seeing spacing as being almost like an opposite issue, whereas usually, we're being like, oh, we want the lane to be open for Kawhi Leonard to be able to drive and attack and stuff. But for the bench unit, it's almost like they have the ability to shoot, but they need to be able to be given open shots.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Obviously, the bench should be improved with Gasol on there just because how he elevates players. That's why I think we both are in agreement. Gasol is the stronger player to have on the roster. Obviously, he didn't have the greatest game with the Spurs, but he couldn't get in a groove because of the refereeing, but we won't talk about that. Regardless, so I think we're on the same page. And in the playoffs, we both agree that Marc Gasol should be in the starting unit, because that's our best lineup. We won't be going as many players deep. But I think we should do that in the regular season. And maybe it sacrifices the bench, but I still think it's the best lineup. I still think Serge can thrive with the bench. And, looking at the players that are going to play in the playoffs, there's no debate. There's no debating it. The starting 5, let's just say Gasol's in the starting 5. Serge Ibaka is going to play in the playoffs. Jeremy Lin is going to play in the playoffs. One of Norm and OG is going to play in the playoffs, and Fred, likely. Those are 9 guys that are are certainly going to be there, in my opinion. And I think getting the chemistry down, regardless of what you're playing, if Patrick McCaw is going to be there. We don't really know what lineups are going to happen. We don't know who's going to really take off down the end of the season. But if our best lineup, if our best team, if we're maxing out, we're going all in, just say for one game, and it makes sense if the right decision is putting Marc Gasol at the starting 5, then I think we should just do that. We should do that and let the other things thrive. I still think the bench would be strong. I don't think, I'm less skeptical on the bench with Serge Ibaka than you are personally, just from this debate. But even just for chemistry side, let's just say you're correct in your assessment on the bench not being able to get open shots and create and all that sort of stuff. I still think it makes most sense to have Gasol in the starting unit, get familiarity. He didn't have training camp with this team. He didn't play the first 50 games of the season with the Raptors. I think getting him, Lowry, Kawhi, comfortable, and Siakam, Danny Green, all those players, because they're going to be the guys we're probably going to close games with. So I think having him in the starting unit, getting that familiarity as we go down the stretch of games, getting Serge Ibaka more comfortable with being a spark plug off the bench to get buckets, not worry about playing within an offense, so to speak, worrying about giving the ball to Kawhi and all these players. I think it just makes the most sense for Marc Gasol to start for the Toronto Raptors team.
All right, well, send a memo out to Nick Nurse, and we'll see what happens. I wouldn't mind to see it, but I don't know. I think we're set for the next few games at least. I think Nick Nurse is confident in the way that he's been running the offensive system, so we'll see what happens for sure. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, oh, certainly. And you can't really go wrong. These are both 2 very, very strong players, great scorers, great all-around defenders, all that sort of stuff. But let us know what you guys think. You're the best for making it this far. We want to hear your comments below. Who do you think should start? Marc Gasol, Serge Ibaka or Chris Boucher. We didn't talk about him. But who do you want to see start at the center position? The Toronto Raptors have an exciting stretch of games coming up to close the season. The playoff seeding is tight. The Pacers are still at the 3rd seed. The Bucks are first. The Celtics and the Sixers are battling it out. We got to get some W's down the stretch, Ryker.
Yep, for sure. And final note, thanks for 8,000 subscribers.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, you guys are the best.
Cheers.